Here I am for this sun-dappled presentation, which is kind of too bad because last night when I was making my first attempt at this, I kid you not, I hit record, started to talk, and this ominous boom of thunder came from outside and went right through the room. And it was absolutely perfect for what I'm about to talk about. And I lost my concentration, kids cut up, all sorts of things happened, and I just couldn't deal with that particular recording session anymore. So here I am in the elven sunlight, inappropriately for the topic, because I want to talk about other ways of, I'm not even going to call it play, other ways to be seated at a table nominally called role playing, and what people do, what I have done, what I have learned and unlearned over quite a long time. And we'll take a look at my concept of situation, straightforward concept, and we're going to say, what are the equivalent symbols to show what I think occurs a lot? Well, the first thing to understand is that this is supposed to be an experience with a particular set of outcomes and events in it. And the best way to look at it is to say, all right, let's look at the overall, content of the situation. So not of the scenes in it, but of the situation itself. And the first thing you'll note is that there is not arrows, like either one arrow or whatever, but there's fixed bars, these purple bars. So in this diagram, purple means fixed, known, in place, there to be done. And in this case, there's one at the end. So in scene terms, we're looking at a climax, and it also does not have arrows in it. It has a fixed set of concepts. Even if this role goes this way or that role goes that way or something, the basics of what is to happen are there. And it's not, it is contingent on a few things, but consider it to be conceptually present. Now, you'll notice that there's also a similar fixed situation in the beginning, because it's not just, oh, I know what the opening situation is going to be. Play always can have that. I'm talking about the content of what needs to be completely established to happen. So I'm not talking about what's established in the situation as a concept. I'm talking about what is established to happen. Certain things have to be done. In particular, people's attention has to be directed in a particular way. That has to be settled. It may seem to you as though I'm talking about ordinary scene framing at the beginning of a session anyway. Stay with me. I'm talking about something harder than that. So, specifically, a first scene, and remember, the purple means this happens. So, the first scene has a this happens in it. You are given this, but the important point is that it's an arrow. It has to go to a particular place. It has to turn out a particular way. So not only do you get a mysterious letter from somebody, but all of this is in place specifically so that you will know that this is, your mission should you choose to accept it. Period. Now, we have, therefore, this first scene, and it's got its little purple arrow, and we've got that climax up there with its set of events that are to happen. Now, what do we do? What is the procedure? What is the process? First, there can, in fact, be a what do you do? That's the black arrow. Remember the black arrows? That's when characters do things. That's when different people get to contribute, and the way that they contribute interacts with one another. This is when instrumentation occurs, so that outcomes with bounce occur and may turn out in ways that nobody can control. Whether it's a big swerve or whether it, bounces along in a way that makes a lot of, isn't surprising to anybody, that's fine. But that black arrow means that play is occurring as a created phenomenon through how we do it. Whereas the purple isn't any such thing. The purple says whatever it is that we're going to be doing, fine, it's turning out this way. So we start off with this purple arrow, and then there may be a black arrow inside the first scene or so where people can kind of mill around and do stuff. But notice the lack of an arrow that goes to the next scene. Something else is happening at that point. That scene has got this real hard border, and it stops. You're allowed to, run around for a little bit or have a few choices or little things like that, but that is over. Done. We have established this whole first scene whose purpose is to point us that way. The climax is down there somewhere, and we are pointed. So whatever the little black arrow was doing in there, it can't do anything except end up this way. From that point on, sort of a void opens up. You have multiple people at the table. You have instrumentation of some kind, which purportedly can sort of change things or stop things or fail at things or accelerate things. You have perhaps complicated things on different character sheets. This person has this problem. This person has this misunderstanding. This person has this, ideology or whatever they may be. There's all sorts of things that are individualized, both about the content and about the way we do things or are supposed to be or purported to be doing things. All of those introduce difficulty for purposes of the experience of getting to that climax. Therefore, one person at least, and for simplicity's sake, we will assume it is one person, but I strongly emphasize that there are designs out there which do this in a multiplied way across everybody doing this. But right now, just for simplicity's sake, we'll say it's one person. Just don't get distracted by the singularity in this phrasing. This is where we talk about these green arrows, and you will notice that they point backwards. They do not have a starting set of circumstances and then have resolutions and then finish up somewhere. Oh, your character is now, drunk and slumped over the bar, or your character has been thrown out the window, or your character is suddenly going, look what I got, right? In ways that were determined and discovered through how we did this. No, that is not what the green arrow is. The green arrow is a pushback. The green arrow, in many ways, is stopping the ball. Okay, it's bouncing, stop it. And this person's job is to look, remember they're face backwards, is to look over their shoulder at that climax or a next step, any purple thing, like a new purple arrow in these scenes, whatever it may be, the next dead body or the next thing. Now it's time for them to find this out, or now something, right? And stopping the ball, looking behind them and seeing whether their butt is still pointed at that. And if necessary, negating whatever occurred in that black arrow, or reinterpreting it, or transitioning from it in some way that stops the causality, stops the momentum of what was occurring. Because if your butt's not pointed at that next purple thing, then we've got to get back to it. We've got to get back in that direction. Here's another thing I don't want anybody to give me any grief about. I am not talking necessarily about things, these purple things, that were made up entirely before play. Some of them may have been, like that climax, but even that doesn't have to be. I don't care when it's made of. It could have been made up 10 seconds ago. during play. The point is that once it is conceived, then it is this person's job, they see it as such, to stop the ball whenever it seems as though we're not headed toward it, and to readjust the fiction in some fashion so that now we are headed toward it. The techniques of doing this, of using these little green arrows, right? There's the big one into from scene to scene. So whatever next scene is coming up, this is like a big version of that. Okay, this whole scene, this all was happening there. Okay, stop it. Look behind me. This has to be the next scene. Make sure we're going the way we're supposed to be. Then within scenes, then we have these little green arrows, which, as you can see, always come after a black one. The idea is to keep getting to the purples, right? So every time there's black play, right? Every time there is this instrumental and spoken and what do you do, all these kinds of things, fine. You can let that go for a bit and let them do what they want, but bam, that ball must stop, look behind you and say, okay, I got to get my butt pointed at that next purple arrow, because that is where we need to go. Purple arrows take us to the purple climax. Fantastic. Even if that purple climax is not going to be conceived in your mind until halfway through play, I don't care. You could have made it up 3 weeks ago. You could have made it up 3 minutes ago. You could have made it up 3 years ago. I don't care. The point is that during play, you're checking on it. And therefore, what are these techniques of those little green arrows? Let us put aside such crudities of saying, you can't do that. Or a roll occurs and going, oh, well, that one doesn't count. You succeed after all, or something like that, so boldly or baldly as to say that instrumentation or the what you said or anything about the black arrow process isn't. No. The techniques are subtler. One is to say what occurred and then just treat it as though it has no consequence. Just keep going as if that didn't really happen. So the person feels as though they did that thing. Well, we're just going to keep talking as if it didn't, or other way around, that they don't do it, it fails, but then you keep playing as if for whatever reason, or maybe you make up a quick reason why it did, or something else happened that is as good as if it did. To say the situation above, remember the situation above, those are all just big green backwards arrows. You can adjust the situation all the time to have it appear as though situational things just changed, or have intruded, or have been revealed after all to be this way instead of that way. Or in your mind, it was going to be this way, but it doesn't have to be, because remember, we're working backwards. We can keep pulling what we need in for the now that we're in to make it go the right way. So you are effectively backing in front of the players doing things, kind of throwing sand in their eyes, or fairy dust, because this is supposed to be fun. Sprinkling the glitter and fairy dust at them, and whatever they do, well, either very gently you adjust situational features or whatever so that it bends what they've done toward where you just looked over your shoulder, or you just change up situational things. A person said they're going to go to this place in this building, but it's very important to you. Your purple arrow says they see something out a window, and you need them to say that they need them to see it out the window. So you say, well, from your bedroom window, you see this. And the player is in the position of basically objecting to you about your job, which is to situate, to know where everybody is in the situation, to keep tabs on that. So they feel like they're messing with an authority if they challenge it and say, I went down there. The same thing occurs when somebody, for example, to pick a very blunt example, announces an attack on a character. I shoot him, I punch him, I tackle him. Well, he kind of, haha, he kind of laughs it off. He's not offended. He's it's okay. And you get all these verbal signals that attack is not really a welcome piece of getting to that next arrow. And so the entire concept that when you say, I punch him, that you pick up your dice and, wait for the acknowledgement that now is the time to roll, is gone. So the very notion of what we say and how we proceed based on talking, what constraints are going to come in necessarily based on the way things are said, is completely at the mercy of the green arrows. All of a sudden you can find that somebody that you're kind of like, wasn't I a stranger in town? Or all of a sudden somebody acts in a particularly odd way. The waiter slips you a note. Or more bluntly, because there's all kinds of reasons, why a waiter would slip you a note in some kind of, legitimate situational play. But in this case, it's because you weren't going the right way. You needed a thing. The green arrow had to come in and point the game master's butt in the right direction, and you were not. So here's the note. All sorts of things that negate, readjust, recontextualize, reinterpret whatever was going on in the black arrows. What are the purple arrows? Those are things like, well, they need to get to the next town, or you need to get over to this other continent. Your flights are booked. Here's your tickets. And in some cases, this can be a little strange for the player who, having accepted that they are on this team and this team goes off and goes places and stuff like that, and may have something in mind of, well, I'm going to do some things before we go or whatever, but this is given a certain urgency. You leave, in an hour. Here's the tickets. Bam. So the idea of, okay, we go. No, that's not even on the table. The player's job is not to say, oh, okay, we go. Fixed. You're there. Now, this is especially odd because instead of merely starting play, for example, on the flight, there's this sense that it has to be arrived at naturalistically. But if you look at the actual techniques being used, it's anything but naturalistic play. It is very much, hit your mark and go that way. So you could have framed us right into the middle of that, right? No, it has to have this, you got to do whatever you want. Oh, and now I redirect it. When we hit a purple arrow, this happens. It goes like this. This is how it turns out. So there's this odd sense of playing my character and not playing my character, going on, or this is the situation we're in, or this is how we play, and then it's not. And it kind of has this stuttering quality, which is usually papered over by an ongoing kind of radio voice depiction of what's happening, that is to be treated as continuous. And we are receiving this. We are receiving the production of this way of speaking, which is what I think people keep talking about when they talk about narrative flow. Thinking of these purple arrows as these these events and this kind of speaking in a smooth flowing way from one to the other, and therefore Black Arrow material when people play and say they do things and pick up dice and stuff like that. And the Green Arrow kind of, and this is where that gets to, and this is how that turns out, and this is how we get to this next Purple Arrow. It's supposed to be kind of a continuous experience of attention to the voice. So this has a tendency to lead people to recognize that the only way that they're really going to get to play at all is to concede, is to watch for the cues. What are we being offered to do? What is the right thing to do? What is the next step? And even the kind of play during the Black Arrow, which isn't really, rebelling particularly, but is still assertive and has a way of not being what that person is expecting to hear, can bring down a Green Arrow real hard. All of a sudden, your dice don't work. All of a sudden, there's, information suddenly is coming in real quick. That's very important. A person who has been present in the scenes quite a bit, but has not been played, just keeps getting described. Apparently, none of us were bright enough to go up and talk to that person. That person suddenly introduces themselves quite, assertively. And, usually to offer help or to, team up with you or something like that. So you have this interaction that becomes very subordinated. If your Black Arrow play is too obstreperous or introduces uncertainties that are not, that seem to be out of the comfort zone of the Green Arrow manager, you're a problem. Even if you are interested in what's going on, even if you are doing your level best to play in it, the fact that you're playing, meaning doing things, announcing stuff, saying where's my character at? How am I going to be reacting to this? Can be perceived as a problem. The person is usually quite good with the problem of the dice not obeying. They're not so good with the problem of a person who, even if they haven't caused any trouble, plot-wise yet, that one's dangerous. Look out for that one. That one's bulky, or that one is unpredictable, right? So you can get these sort of tense power dynamics that get going even when one person really doesn't want them. And also, since everything has to be in this kind of we're all having fun atmosphere, tends to start getting this kind of desperate, tense cheerfulness. Tends to, I think, very characteristic sort of discomfort pervades the experience of play. How about as things go along? The second dead body is found, or the portal, has been discovered, or this piece of information has, been put together with that piece of information, and the person is expecting you to go, okay, well, then that means if we have got A and B, then we've got to do C. Okay, there we go. Well, all these are happening usually in terms of upon this event, or perhaps it's timed upon this particular, we've played long enough. This was supposed to be 3 sessions. It's now at the end of the second session, or this is a single session. We're 2/3 of the way. It's usually 2/3 of the way through to 3/4 of the way through. It's time to get to that climax. And so at that point, after this sort of very green play through a sequence of events has occurred, it's time to cut the shit and say, we're going to the climax. And in many cases, you've had what a friend of mine calls the Panama Canal situation, where all of this, what do you do, and all of the little purple arrows are dedicated to not being the climax yet. There's the idea that all sorts of things should happen first. We need to have enough of this sort of activity, effect, and enough brought together so that when we do know what's going on, or when we are in the final confrontation, all these other things will make so much sense. Therefore, you have to do this for a while. Okay, but what about when the while is done? What is the technique? This is what I'm talking about with the Panama Canal. Think of the Atlantic Ocean and think of us in a ship, and we can go traveling all over the Atlantic. We can go across it straight in any direction. We can go around some of the coasts. We can visit here, visit there. We can hear about something and take a special trip to go off and visit there, and all sorts of things. And there's little pirate treasures, and there's little sea monsters, and there's little ports of call, and most particularly, there are cool characters, people whom this player can present. Characters with personality. Think of a different character actor. Oh, look, this one's Bette Midler. Oh, this one's Harvey Keitel. Oh, this one's Sam Jackson. Oh, well, this one, this is Keanu Reeves. And they can do whoever this is characteristically with verve. And we get to watch this. So we travel around the Atlantic. We bump into all kinds of places. What won't happen is anything that is enough information for us to be very assertive to go and do a thing, particularly of situational significance. Punching up into the situation from where we are in our scenes, you will notice here there is no such arrow. So therefore, the situation basically only exists so we can keep going, the person can keep walking backwards into the climax. We are not capable of punching upwards and changing the nature of the situation so that different information, as context is occurring for our later scenes. So no matter what we uncover, investigate, discover, happen upon, it's all raw meat, raw material for an eventual understanding later, but not now. So we're never going to get out of the Atlantic. We can just keep going, bouncing around, and it'll be the same lack of situational change or understanding of situation enough for an assertive act until they dig the Panama Canal. Because you see, the climax is over there in the Pacific. They have to dig the Panama Canal, and we will sail through it. Think of it as kind of a pressure, perhaps, right? We've built up enough pressure of all of our interactions at the Atlantic. Something's going on. The danger is getting higher. This person has disappeared. That person has revealed a secret. That the pressure is up. So when the Panama Canal gets dug, zoosh, the pressure scoots us through into the Pacific, where the climactic events may occur. What are the techniques? So if the Panama Canal is here, what are some characteristic techniques that are, and I'm mixing metaphors all over the place, but the most common technique, not universal, but one of the most common techniques is what I call Bobby G. So Bobby G is a non-player character who will tell you critical information at a particular time, at that point of maximum, I suppose we could call it dramatic tension, but it has no capacity on its own for you to say anything or know anything that you can actually act upon. Bobby G has to fill that gap. I imagine Bobby G is kind of this, sort of shady character, right? Perhaps an informant, a police informant in a cyberpunk game, or perhaps a down at the heels private detective, or maybe it's a government agent, right? Just a voice on the phone, here's what you don't know, sort of presentation. Or maybe it is a scrap of paper but it's usually a kind of a shady character who is either in so deep that they can't blow their cover, or they're terrified and this is the last thing they're going to tell you before they get out of town, or something of that kind. Or maybe they're, coming clean, the servant comes clean with this information that they've kept secret this whole time. Often Bobby G is like a possessing spirit. There's all these different NPCs around, and we discovered that this one is Bobby G, even though if they had been Bobby G, then they wouldn't have done what they did before. But they are now. Or Bobby G has been waiting quietly in the wings the entire time. So whether it's a possessing spirit that hops into one of the non-player characters at this moment, or whether it's been a non-player character who's been sort of waiting for the right time, for their go to come in and do their job, they'll tell you that the deal's going down at the warehouse at midnight. And I don't really care what genre we're talking about. I don't really care what things are afoot, or what our characters said they wanted, or what kind of characters we're playing. It's always going to be the deal's going down at the warehouse at midnight. Fill in any equivalent for any of those three concepts that you need. That's what Bobby G tells you. So think of the Panama Canal model as sort of the big picture, what's going on. Bobby G is a very, very useful little device for, opening the canal for you. So the point, though, is we're done with volitional play at this point, insofar as there ever was any of these little teeny tiny black arrows where you kind of, as I say, someone's driving the car and you're sitting in the back seat with a little plastic steering wheel going boom, boom, right? And so you got to do that during those black arrows. Be happy, okay? You got to do what you want. You got to play your characters. What else do you want from me? We have things to do here. Don't you want a good story? So, bam, that box closes and the transition is fixed. We're en route across the Panama Canal, and now we are at the climax, and the things to do at the climax are set. If there were things we needed to have that we didn't have at the start of play, but we need them in order to deal with the problem at the climax, well, we've got them now. That's been settled. If there were a timing element to all of this, and delays had come in during play due to uncontrollable black arrows or aspects of it, well then, so what? The timetable's been bumped. All of these things are now non-volitional and have nothing to do with what has actually really occurred in play prior to this point at all, because whatever that has been, the green arrows have moved us, to this situation, this features of the final scene. And it occurs as a delivered phenomenon. Typically, dice are rolled, in many of these games, dice will be rolled in profusion. There will be lots and lots and lots of procedural details, but usually in some kind of statistical context that really it's going to come out the way it should. This is not an arrow. We do not consider what happens through the course of the procedures and statements that we make. Instead, bam, we do this. It may be that whoever is socially hosting or has taken on a fairly hefty creative side or set of responsibilities at the end of a session can ask people, I hope you enjoyed yourself, or is everyone having a good time, and stuff like that. And it may not be some kind of toxic or weird or indicative statement of any kind. But that said, I have noted when playing in games of this kind that the person, it's often one person who has this particular role, phrases this in a way that I find weird. I hope you had a good time. Is everyone enjoying themselves? It's curiously transitive. They had brought it. We have received it. The idea that any one of us could be asking this of any of the rest of us is absent entirely. Or strangely, that this has been brought, the effort has, it's like cooking, right? I have brought this. It is incumbent upon you to thank me. And in the context of somebody going to all this work of making this great meal and all the rest of it, that is nothing more than ordinary courtesy and a perfectly reasonable social thing to do and expect. The question is whether role-playing is that kind of phenomenon where this person is the chef. And I submit that the history of how this form of play or activity became so substantially ingrained in the hobby, I think is understandable. I'm not going into this history here, but it has, over the years, become the primary training, the definition of game mastering. And textually, and over time, at first it wasn't in the text, but it was done. Then it was implied in texts, and now you can find it as flat out instruction in texts. Along with the notion that this is the only way you're going to get a story. The only way. Talking to people about doing this, first they're defensive and claim they do no such thing. Then they allow as how they might do this or that just to keep, the flow going. I mean, that's part of their job, right? They got to keep the flow going. They've got to, make sure it all makes sense. They've got to, come on, that's reasonable, right? So they'll allow as how they do some of this, but it's all very, very, facilitative. You can still do whatever you want. And then when you finally point out stuff like the Bobby G stuff and whatever, if they don't become angry, they'll say, yeah, but someone has to, right? You have to do that. So there seems to be no capacity to play with just black arrows and checking into situation as we understand it, or whoever understands it, checking into that as a context at all times. That doesn't seem to be possible from this framework.